People say blood is thicker than water, but they never mention the crippling cost of scrubbing that stain from your life. I used to think family was a safe harbor. I was wrong. My own flesh and blood brought a Category 5 hurricane to destroy everything I built. Listen closely. The deadliest enemy is often the person sitting across the Thanksgiving table, smiling as they pass you a plate, hiding a sharpened knife in their other hand. Hello, wonderful viewers of Vivian Revenge Stories. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here today. Unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to survive and keep creating content for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or pinned comment of this video. My name is Athena Carroll. I am 34 years old, and I am a senior cybersecurity incident response specialist at Aegis Nexus Shield. My daily reality consists of standing between foreign ransomware syndicates and the critical infrastructure of our cities. When a shadow organization tries to hold a municipal hospital's life support databases hostage, or when bad actors attempt to shut down a regional power grid in the dead of winter, I am the one who deploys the countermeasures. It is a grueling, high-stakes career that demands absolute focus and razor-sharp precision. I sleep with my phone on maximum volume, always ready for the next disaster. Then, there is my brother, Julian. He is 36 years old and the undisputed golden child of our family. If you look at his social media profiles, you will see a self-proclaimed investment and lifestyle consultant living an untouchable life in Austin, Texas. The reality is far more pathetic. Julian's entire existence is a carefully curated mirage built on rented luxury vehicles he returns by sundown, a blatantly fake Rolex watch that ticks far too loudly, and an endless stream of hollow motivational word salad videos he posts online. He sells the illusion of success to vulnerable people, preaching about the elite mindset while producing absolutely nothing of actual value. Yet in my parents' eyes, Julian is a modern visionary. At every family gathering, the dynamic is brutally clear. During Thanksgiving dinners, my mother and father will spend hours fawning over Julian's latest photos standing next to a leased helicopter, praising his imaginary upper-class lifestyle. Meanwhile, they look down their noses at my career. To them, my high-level security clearance and life-saving digital interventions are entirely invisible. They regularly dismiss my profession to their wealthy country club friends, referring to me simply as a glorified IT help desk keyboard pusher who needs to get out of the basement and find a husband. I learned a long time ago to swallow the bitter pill of their blatant favoritism and focus entirely on my own independence. My ultimate sanctuary from their toxic behavior was my house. For 8 excruciatingly long years, I saved every single penny I earned. I bought a beautiful piece of land by the lake and meticulously designed my dream home from the ground up. I chose every plank of oak flooring, every piece of stone for the fireplace, and built a wraparound porch where I could finally breathe in peace. It was my physical proof that I did not need their financial support or emotional validation to build a meaningful life. Then came the Tuesday afternoon that shattered my world completely. I had just finished a brutal 14-hour shift and checked my mail. I found a standard-looking heavy envelope from the county tax assessor's office. When I tore it open, my exhausted eyes locked onto a phrase that made the blood freeze instantly in my veins. The document clearly stated, "Transfer of ownership." It officially registered a change to the deed of my lake house. My hands shook violently as I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring, the background noise of a television playing softly behind her. I demanded to know what on earth was going on with the deed to my property. Her response was so casual, so horrifyingly nonchalant, that I actually stopped breathing for a few seconds. She freely admitted to executing the deed transfer without my knowledge. 5 years ago, I suffered a ruptured appendix and had to undergo emergency surgery. I was single, terrified, and heavily medicated on painkillers. So I signed a temporary medical and financial power of attorney over to my mother, just in case things went wrong on the operating table. I survived, moved on with my life, and completely forgot to formally file the paperwork to revoke that document. "It is just a little paperwork adjustment, Athena," my mother said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "I used the power of attorney to officially gift 50% of the house to your brother. He needs the physical collateral to secure a massive business loan." I screamed into the receiver, demanding to know how she could steal half of everything I owned and bleed me dry to fund Julian's fake internet life. "Do not act like a crazy person," she snapped back, her tone turning ice cold and utterly unsympathetic. "Julian is on the verge of expanding his mindset elevation business empire. He just needs a final financial push to break into the true upper class and make our family name mean something. You are a single woman. You do not need a giant lake house all to yourself anyway. It is your sacred duty to help your brother succeed. And since you were too selfish to offer the help yourself, I made the decision for you as the matriarch of this family." I hung up the phone with my mother and immediately dialed Julian. The ringing sound in my ear felt like a countdown to an inevitable explosion. He answered with a sickeningly smooth chuckle, the kind of laugh a predator makes when it knows the prey is already hopelessly caught in the trap. "Calm down, Athena," he drawled, the fake southern accent grating against my frayed nerves. "Do not act like a crazy person over a piece of paper. You are blowing this entirely out of proportion." I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter until my knuckles turned completely white. I demanded to know how he could justify stealing half of my home. He sighed loudly into the receiver, playing the part of a weary genius explaining basic mathematics to a slow child. "I am simply utilizing idle capital," he said smoothly. "Your house was just sitting there by the lake, doing absolutely nothing. I am putting those dead assets to work. When my lifestyle brand goes public next year, I will pay you back double. You should be thanking me for the investment opportunity." Before I could unleash the absolute fury boiling in my throat, my phone buzzed with an incoming group call request. My parents had merged the lines. Suddenly I was trapped in a suffocating digital interrogation room with all three of them. The psychological warfare began instantly. My father took the lead, his voice trembling with manufactured disappointment. "You are acting completely cold-blooded, Athena. How can you be so incredibly selfish?" My mother chimed in, twisting the emotional knife even deeper. "You are hoarding your little pot of gold while your own flesh and blood is out here trying to elevate our family name into the upper echelons of society. You should be deeply ashamed of your petty jealousy. You are trying to ruin his big break because you are miserable and alone." They spun a dizzying, suffocating web of guilt, painting me as the villain in my own life story. They wanted me to believe I was a greedy, ungrateful spinster trying to sabotage her brilliant brother. The walls of my beautiful house, the sanctuary I built with my own two hands, suddenly felt like a shrinking cage closing in on my lungs. The old Athena might have cried. The old Athena might have argued until her voice gave out, desperate for their love, begging for them to see reason. But the woman standing in the middle of that living room was a senior security specialist trained to hunt down digital terrorists. I did not shed a single tear. I did not utter another defensive word. I simply ended the call, shutting off their toxic voices, and walked straight into my home office. The moment my fingers touched the cold mechanical keys of my workstation, the panic dissolved into a deadly calculating focus. My first move was purely defensive. I contacted the major credit bureaus and initiated a total, unbreakable freeze on every single piece of my personal credit and banking infrastructure. Then, I went on the offensive. I bypassed the standard public property portals. Using the encrypted forensic search protocols I normally reserved for tracking state-sponsored hackers, I began tearing into the deepest layers of the county and state financial databases. The glow of the multiple monitors cast harsh, blue shadows across my face as encrypted financial documents began to render on my screen. What I found waiting in the dark corners of the registry was far worse than a simple, fraudulent deed transfer. It was a digital death warrant. Julian had not just placed his name on half of my property. He had weaponized it. He used my meticulously appraised lake house as cross-collateral to secure a massive, high-interest bridge loan. The amount glaring back at me made my stomach violently drop. $3 million. But the horror did not stop at that staggering number. My instincts screamed that legitimate banks do not hand over that kind of cash to a man with no verifiable corporate revenue. I began tracing the routing numbers of the supposed private equity fund that issued the cash. It took me 3 grueling hours to strip away the shell companies, the dummy corporations, and the blind trusts registered in offshore tax havens. Beneath the polished corporate veneer, the truth was terrifying. This was not a bank. It was a notorious underground credit syndicate. It was dirty, highly dangerous black market money tied directly to violent organized crime syndicates operating out of the southern border. The air in my office grew completely thin. Julian was not just playing businessman anymore. He was swimming with apex predators who preferred to collect their debts in blood rather than wire transfers. By legally tying my home to that illicit loan, he had dragged me right into the center of the feeding frenzy. If he missed a single payment, those people would not take him to civil court to settle the dispute. They would come to my house in the middle of the night. That realization snapped the last remaining thread of familial loyalty I held in my heart. My phone lit up again. My parents' text messages began flooding my screen, cursing me for hanging up, calling me a traitor to the family bloodline. I ignored every single notification. I grabbed a high-capacity encrypted flash drive and rapidly downloaded every server log, every falsified loan application, and every digital footprint of the syndicate's routing numbers. I grabbed my car keys, walked out the front door, and drove straight through the night toward the downtown federal building. I was not going to file a complaint at a local police precinct. I walked directly into the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically demanding an immediate audience with the lead agent of the Cyber and Financial Crimes Division. The family game was entirely over. It was time to burn their illusion to the ground. The sterile, fluorescent lights of the federal field office cast a sickly pale glare over the metal table. I slid my encrypted flash drive across the surface toward lead Special Agent Thomas. He was a veteran investigator who initially looked at me like just another panicked civilian involved in a domestic dispute. But as he plugged the drive into his secure terminal and watched my meticulously organized forensic breakdown populate his screen, his entire demeanor shifted instantly. He cross-referenced my name, immediately spotting my active, high-level security clearances through Aegis Nexus Shield. The tension in the room thickened dramatically. Agent Thomas realized they were not just dealing with a frantic victim. They had an insider with the exact technical expertise they desperately needed. He paused, closed his laptop, and asked me a question that changed the trajectory of the investigation entirely. He requested my indirect collaboration. The Bureau had been trying to breach Julian's network of shell companies for months, but the digital architecture was protected by offshore military-grade encryption. They needed a scalpel to slice through the firewalls without triggering the automated data destruction protocols. I did not hesitate for a single second. I told him to point me to a terminal. For the next 14 hours, I sat in a windowless subterranean operations center, operating entirely off adrenaline and bitter black coffee. I moved methodically, picking apart the digital locks my brother had paid black market developers to build. It was exactly like performing an autopsy on a monster without using any anesthesia. I peeled back the glossy, motivational exterior of his lifestyle brand, exposing the rotting, festering core of his true enterprise layer by painful layer. Julian was not an entrepreneur. He was not a visionary. He was the cold-blooded architect of a sprawling, predatory Ponzi scheme. The truth was violently repulsive. The money funding his fake luxury watches, his leased supercars, and his arrogant internet videos did not come from legitimate investments or brilliant market strategies. I tracked the incoming wire transfers back to their absolute source, decrypting the hidden ledgers. He was systematically targeting the most vulnerable people in the country. The files were filled with the drained retirement accounts of elderly military veterans and the life savings of retired public school teachers. He had been charming desperate people out of their pensions, promising them guaranteed high-yield returns, and then using the new victims' money to pay the older ones. He kept the massive remainder to fund his own pathetic illusions. But a scam of that enormous magnitude required a pristine financial anchor to survive the routine scrutiny of banking compliance algorithms. As I dug deeper into the foundational architecture of his corporate structure, looking at the root source code of his shell companies, I found my own name buried in the dirt. Julian had completely weaponized my flawless financial history. He used my immaculate credit score, my stable employment record at a major national cybersecurity firm, and the newly acquired equity of my lake house to create an impenetrable aura of credibility. Whenever an auditor or a compliance officer flagged a suspicious transaction, Julian's automated systems would point directly to my assets and my pristine professional reputation as the ultimate guarantor. I was the silent, unwitting shield protecting millions of dollars of illicit cash flow. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow to the chest. He did not just steal half of my house. He had stolen my entire identity, meticulously framing the architecture of his fraud so that if the federal authorities ever came knocking, the digital paper trail would lead directly to my doorstep. He had built his entire empire on top of my grave. My hands felt entirely numb as I continued to follow the outbound money trail, determined to map every single parasite feeding off the blood money. I accessed the automated payroll distributions of his primary shell company. There, hidden beneath layers of obfuscated accounting jargon and fake vendor invoices, I found the final, fatal truth that severed my soul from my family forever. I stared at the recurring monthly transactions until my vision blurred. $20,000. Every single month, precisely on the first day of the month, a wire transfer for $20,000 was deposited directly into my parents' joint checking account. It was neatly categorized as an executive consultancy fee. The walls of the Federal Operations Center seemed to spin rapidly around me. My parents were not naive, innocent victims of Julian's narcissistic charm. They were entirely complicit. They knew exactly where the money was coming from. The lavish country club memberships, the expensive golf outings, the designer clothes they wore while mocking my career at Thanksgiving dinners, all of it was funded by the stolen pensions of sick veterans and exhausted teachers. The horrifying clarity of their master plan washed over me, cold and paralyzing. They had forced me to give up the deed to my house under the guise of family duty, but it was a carefully calculated, predatory setup from the very beginning. They were fully aware that Julian was running an illegal empire, and they knew the entire structure was destined to inevitably collapse. When the music finally stopped and the FBI eventually raided the operation, they needed a designated scapegoat. They needed someone with a high-level corporate background and massive collateral to take the catastrophic fall. They had collectively decided to offer me up as the sacrificial lamb. My own mother and father were perfectly willing to watch me rot in a federal penitentiary for decades, stripped of my career and my freedom, just so their precious golden boy could slip away into the night and they could keep their stolen wealth. They did not just view me as a disappointment. They viewed me as a highly convenient human shield. I stared at the glowing blue screen, the reflection of my face devoid of any sorrow, grief, or familial love. The daughter they thought they could manipulate was dead. Only pure, unadulterated ice remained in her place. The takedown happened exactly 3 days later on a Friday evening, and it was a breathtaking symphony of absolute chaos. Julian was in the middle of hosting a lavish black tie investment fundraising gala at his massive rented mansion in the Austin Hills. The champagne was flowing freely, a live string quartet was playing in the corner, and my brother was standing halfway up a grand marble staircase, holding a crystal glass, preaching his usual garbage about financial freedom to a crowd of wealthy sycophants. He never even got to finish his arrogant toast. The heavy oak front doors were violently breached, cracking off their hinges with a deafening crash. A massive swarm of federal agents in full tactical gear flooded the grand foyer. The music stopped abruptly. Women screamed in sheer terror, and the crowd of fake elites scrambled backward, dropping their drinks as the lead agent tackled Julian, slamming him face first onto the polished marble floor. They aggressively handcuffed him right there, reading him his rights while dragging him out in his custom-tailored tuxedo. His guests stood frozen, watching his entire fake empire burn to ashes in front of their eyes. At the exact same hour, my parents were enjoying a sun-drenched afternoon on the 18th hole of their exclusive country club. They were undoubtedly bragging about their son to their wealthy friends right up until the moment 3 unmarked black SUVs tore recklessly across the pristine green grass. Heavily armed federal agents stepped out, surrounded the golf cart, and publicly escorted both of my parents into the back of the vehicles for intense questioning. Every single one of their high society friends watched in stunned, gossiping silence. In the span of 60 seconds, the immaculate, aristocratic reputation my parents had worshipped and protected their entire lives was permanently obliterated. They were granted bail the following morning pending formal federal charges, but instead of calling a defense lawyer or hiding in shame, they completely lost their minds. Blinded by absolute, irrational rage, they drove straight to the heavily fortified headquarters of Aegis Nexus Shield. I was sitting at my secure terminal when the emergency alarms triggered in the main lobby. I rushed down to the atrium to find my mother and father physically fighting against the armed security guards, their faces purple with frantic anger. My mother spotted me, pointed a shaking accusatory finger across the room, and began screaming at the top of her lungs. "You evil, jealous devil!" she shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the glass walls. "You destroyed this family because you could not stand to see your own brother succeed. You are a cold-blooded monster." My father tried to lunge past the security turnstiles, spitting pure venom. "We should have left you to rot. You are nothing but a bitter, miserable computer geek tearing down a true visionary. You ruined us." They were entirely unhinged, but they did not realize they were screaming in a building filled with fiercely loyal cybersecurity experts who considered me their actual, chosen family. Within seconds, my colleagues abandoned their desks and marched into the lobby, forming a solid, unmoving human wall of intimidation between me and my hysterical parents. The head of corporate security did not waste a single word negotiating. He physically grabbed my father by the collar, forcefully shoved both of them out the automatic sliding glass doors, and immediately filed an emergency permanent restraining order on my behalf. They were thrown out onto the public sidewalk like garbage. I thought the nightmare was finally reaching its end, but I severely underestimated the sheer calculating malice of a cornered rat. Julian had used the last of his hidden, stolen funds to hire a ruthless, high-powered defense attorney. 2 days later, this lawyer walked into the federal prosecutor's office and dropped a catastrophic nuclear bomb on my entire life. They did not bother denying the existence of the Ponzi scheme. Instead, they executed a flawless, terrifying counterattack. The lawyer presented a massive mountain of newly discovered, highly sophisticated digital evidence. There were spoofed server logs, encrypted chat transcripts, synthetically generated voice recordings, and falsified remote access footprints that all pointed directly to my personal IP address. The defense attorney looked the lead federal prosecutor dead in the eye and spun a brilliant, damning narrative. He argued that Julian was nothing more than a naive, foolish puppet, a handsome face used strictly as a marketing frontman. The real mastermind, the attorney claimed with chilling conviction, was the brilliant, shadowy cyber expert's sister. He argued that I was the only person in the family with the exact technical skills required to build, operate, and conceal a massive, encrypted financial fraud network. The forged evidence was so incredibly complex, so intricately woven into the digital fabric of the case, that even the federal agents who had initially trusted me were forced to step back and reevaluate everything. The blowback was instantaneous and devastating. Human Resources called me into a sterile, windowless conference room and demanded I hand over my security badge. I was immediately suspended indefinitely without pay pending an exhaustive internal corporate investigation. 2 armed guards escorted me out of the building I loved, watching as I carried my personal belongings in a small cardboard box. In the span of a single week, my hard-earned career, my freedom, and my entire future were violently ripped away. My life was now hanging by a razor-thin, fraying thread, and I was staring directly down the barrel of a 20-year federal prison sentence for a crime my own blood had committed. I locked the heavy deadbolt on the front door of my lake house, drawing every single blind and plunging the interior into a suffocating darkness. I was completely cornered, entirely stripped of my hard-earned professional credentials, and staring directly into the abyss of a 20-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The sheer weight of my own blood relatives systematically framing me for a devastating financial crime threatened to crush my sanity entirely. I walked into my home office, powered on my custom-built heavy-duty server racks, and sat down in the cold leather chair. I did not leave that room. I did not eat, and I did not sleep for the next 72 hours. The physical toll of extreme sleep deprivation quickly began to tear at my edges. By the end of the second day, my hands were shaking violently from severe caffeine toxicity, and my eyes burned as if someone had rubbed crushed glass directly into my corneas. I was fighting a desperate, lonely war against ghost hackers who had meticulously painted my digital fingerprints all over Julian's dirty empire. The fabricated evidence was brilliantly executed. Every time I managed to peel back a layer of the fake routing protocols, I hit a dead end. A digital mirror reflecting my own forged identity back at me. I was sinking deep into an ocean of utter despair, realizing that the criminal syndicate Julian hired might actually be skilled enough to send me to prison forever. Right at the exact moment my spirit was about to break completely, a highly classified, encrypted communication window violently popped open on my secondary monitor. The command line interface glowed bright green in the darkness. It was a direct, untraceable peer-to-peer connection. My heart hammered against my ribs as the text scrolled across the screen. Did you honestly think we would let a bunch of amateur internet thugs take down our best operative? It was my department director at Aegis Nexus Shield. He had not abandoned me. Behind the backs of the corporate human resources department and entirely off the official grid, my boss and 4 of my most elite trusted colleagues had pooled their resources. They routed massive amounts of decentralized processing power through a secure backdoor, handing me the keys to a digital supercomputer. They were risking their own highly lucrative careers and their federal security clearances just to give me a fighting chance. My throat tightened painfully, and hot tears finally spilled over my eyelashes. My biological parents had happily offered me up to the slaughterhouse, but these people, bound by loyalty and mutual respect instead of genetics, stepped into the line of fire to save my life. They were my true family. Armed with the staggering processing power of my team, my defensive posture instantly evaporated. I went on a ruthless, scorched-earth offensive. I did not just look at the fabricated evidence Julian's lawyers had submitted. I violently ripped its underlying source code to pieces. I utilized advanced packet-sniffing algorithms to trace the microscopic latency delays hidden inside the spoofed Internet Protocol addresses. The mercenaries Julian hired were incredibly good, but nobody is perfect. They had used an automated script to generate the synthetic voice recordings of me supposedly orchestrating the scam. Working backward, I isolated the exact software signature of the artificial intelligence generator they used, locating the digital receipt for its purchase. The software license was bought using a prepaid debit card entirely tied to a burner phone located in downtown Austin, exactly 2 blocks from Julian's rented mansion. But destroying their fake evidence was not enough. To permanently secure my freedom and ensure Julian never saw the light of day again, I had to find the undisputed anchor of his guilt. I had to locate the physical vault where he was hoarding the stolen millions. I knew the fatal psychological flaw of every single amateur, narcissistic criminal. They are profoundly greedy, and they possess severe control issues. Julian would never trust a third-party money launderer or an offshore bank manager to hold his massive fortune. He would demand absolute total control over the vault. He would build a fortress that only he could open. I dove into the darkest, most heavily encrypted sectors of his international server network, completely bypassing the obvious shell companies and decoy databases. I spent 12 agonizing hours scanning the vast empty spaces between the data packets, searching for the invisible tether. Just as the morning sun began to bleed through the cracks in my window blinds on the third day, I found it. Buried beneath 7 layers of military-grade obfuscation, hidden inside an anonymous server farm located in an Eastern European jurisdiction, I unearthed a massive, decentralized cryptocurrency wallet. The raw financial value sitting inside that digital vault was staggering, representing every single penny of the stolen retirement funds. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I initiated a brute force diagnostic against the wallet's security architecture. I needed to see exactly how the lock mechanism functioned. The results rendered on my screen, and a slow, fierce smile spread across my exhausted face. I had found the ultimate kill shot. The undeniable, undisputed proof of total guilt. Julian had indeed demanded absolute security for his stolen wealth. A standard alphanumeric password could be stolen, guessed, or hacked. A physical hardware key could be misplaced or confiscated by federal agents. So Julian had opted for the most extreme, unbreakable security measure available on the dark web. The cryptocurrency wallet was entirely secured by a multi-layer, dynamic biometric lock. To authorize any transfer of funds, to even view the ledger, the system demanded 2 simultaneous, live-action inputs. First, it required a high-definition retinal scan. Second, it required a dynamic vocal recognition matrix where the user had to read a randomly generated, continuously changing string of words aloud. You can spoof an internet protocol address. You can forge a digital signature. You can fabricate a chat log. But you absolutely cannot fake a live, pulsating human retina, and you cannot mathematically simulate a real-time vocal cord vibration matrix to fool a military-grade biometric scanner. That vault belonged to one specific biological organism on the entire planet. The only person who could open that digital door, the undisputed mastermind of the entire fraudulent empire, was the man possessing Julian's exact eyes and Julian's exact voice. I meticulously compiled the server logs, the biometric security protocols, and the routing maps into an impenetrable, heavily encrypted digital dossier. The trap was perfectly assembled, the steel jaws pulled back and ready to snap shut. The hunted had become the hunter, and my brother had left nowhere to run. The courtroom air was thick with the suffocating arrogance of my brother. Julian sat comfortably on the witness stand, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit, looking every bit the victim he was pretending to be. He was moments away from formally signing a highly generous plea agreement. In exchange for a drastically reduced sentence of mere probation, he was about to swear under oath that he was just a clueless pawn and that I was the ruthless mastermind behind the entire financial slaughter. He looked across the room, caught my eye, and offered a tiny, sickeningly smug smirk. He thought he had won. He thought I was already buried. He did not realize I had spent the morning briefing the lead federal prosecutor and handing over the decrypted biometric dossier. The prosecutor stood up, smoothly rejecting the plea agreement document sitting on the judge's bench. Instead, he activated the massive digital projector mounted in the center of the courtroom. The screen flared to life, displaying the highly classified source code of the offshore cryptocurrency vault I had cracked. The prosecutor methodically walked the judge and the jury through the irrefutable mechanics of the biometric lock. He explained the high-definition retinal scan. He detailed the dynamic vocal recognition matrix. "Your Honor," the prosecutor announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The defense claims the defendant is a victim of his sister's technical genius, yet the sole vault containing the stolen millions requires the exact biological, living eyes and the specific, pulsating vocal cords of only one human being on Earth to access. The prosecutor pressed a button, and the courtroom speakers echoed with the chilling, undeniable sound of Julian's own voice reading a randomly generated security phrase to unlock the vault, recorded just 3 weeks prior. The smirk vanished from Julian's face, replaced by a pale, horrifying realization. His high-priced defense attorney dropped his pen, burying his face in his hands. The entire fabricated defense instantly shattered into a million pieces. Julian completely snapped. The polished, charismatic illusion he had worn his entire life violently tore open. He leaped up from the witness chair, his face contorted in absolute primal rage, and pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "You always had to ruin everything," he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically, echoing off the mahogany walls. "You always had to show off how brilliant you are. You think you are so much better than me. You could not just let me have this. I built an empire, and you tore it down because you are nothing but a jealous, miserable outsider." In his blind, uncontrollable fury, he confessed to everything right there on the public record. He admitted to building the empire. The judge immediately slammed the gavel down, ordering the bailiffs to physically restrain him. The hammer of justice fell with breathtaking speed and crushing weight. Julian was sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Because my parents had knowingly accepted the stolen funds, they were convicted as accessories to federal fraud. They avoided prison time due to their age, but the Internal Revenue Service swooped in and mercilessly seized absolutely everything they owned. Their bank accounts, their luxury cars, their country club memberships, and their sprawling estate were entirely liquidated to pay back the victims. They were instantly reduced to absolute total bankruptcy. As I walked out of the heavy double doors of the courtroom, I found my parents waiting in the marble hallway. They looked small, pathetic, and terrified. My mother rushed forward, shedding desperate crocodile tears, reaching out to grab my arm. She begged me to forgive them. She pleaded with me to use my savings to hire a lawyer to save them from being thrown out onto the street. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply opened my purse, reached inside, and pulled out a single crisp $1 bill. I placed it gently into my mother's trembling palm. "This is the entire value of this family," I said, my voice completely steady and entirely hollow. "Do not ever contact me again." I turned my back on them and walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight, never looking over my shoulder even once. My exoneration was swift and absolute. I was welcomed back to Aegis Nexus Shield, not just as a specialist, but I was immediately promoted to Vice President of Threat Intelligence. My colleagues threw a massive celebration, welcoming me back to my true family. Using the federal restitution funds granted to me after the government cleared the fraudulent liens against my property, I renovated my lake house from the ground up. I transformed it into an impenetrable, beautiful fortress of absolute peace. With the remaining funds, I established a full-ride cybersecurity scholarship specifically designed for young women trying to escape toxic, abusive households. I took the darkest chapter of my life and used it to write a brilliant, powerful, and completely free future. Hello again, wonderful listeners. I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to listen to my story today. Where are you tuning in from? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and meaningful, please consider helping our channel with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Your incredible support allows us to pay our dedicated team, helps them feed their families, and ensures we can continue bringing you more high-quality stories in the future. Thank you so much, and take care of yourselves.